Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the American Scouser Fantasy Premier League Show. We are getting ready for the double game week 22 with my man Matoush. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. It's absolutely freezing here in Chicago. So if you're around here, I feel for you because it's pretty rough. How's it up there for you guys?
It is pretty cold, I have to say. I think it's going to get a lot colder over the weekend. I think Saturday is going to be the coldest day of the entire winter for us, and maybe one of like our record lows. Like real feel outside is going to be like in the negatives, like teens. And I know that happens to you guys a lot with the wind,
Yeah.
but here it doesn't really happen with the actual air. So I think it's going to be really scary. I know like a lot of the local chapters and places are all making sure to open up like homeless shelters, and they're just opening up like gymnasiums at schools because it's going to be like scary cold. So
Yeah.
I hope everyone's able to stay healthy. So outside of it being really cold and you deciding to show up in a really snazzy jacket when I show up in a regular old hoodie, you also look like you might be in the dark, almost like you're in the witness protection program. Does that have anything to do with some of the moves? It's been a couple of weeks since we got together, and I thought before we even started, there might be something you wanted to get off your chest other than that jacket.
I I just came from work, man. You gotta cut me some slack.
I love you. I'm just kidding.
No, I know. I know. I would like to say I don't regret anything. Other than all the choices I made. Yes, so my co-host was able to give me the second loss of the season this year. And I see a comment from BJ that we'll get to, but he is also rapidly catching up to me as well. He's only 5 points behind me overall. And so not only is the weather freezing cold, but so is my game time, my playing time, my fantasy team is very cold as well because I have not hit a green arrow in what feels like a month and a half because it actually has been at least a month and a half.
We'll get there. We're going to get into this. And to BJ's question, and you made the comment. So BJ checked in. Greetings, gentlemen. Triple captain Rashford this week or Holland in double game week 23? And I promise you, BJ, that is actually a talking point for a little later in the show. But we're going to start here like we always do with a quick look at the standings of the American Scouser Cup. Because as we all like to feel, Pep is the reason that we follow this game at this point, is to have someone that is associated to us we've never met or don't know, and is smart enough not to come on our pod before it would probably torpedo his season. But he is currently at 1,370 points, which leaves him just over 2,600 in the world. Another good week, 75. I look quickly. If I had one piece of either constructive criticism, maybe recommendation, is just play Botman. You've had Sven Botman all year, and in the last 6 game weeks, Pep started him once and got an auto sub for him once. And in those 6 game weeks, he has 6 clean sheets. So I'm pretty sure it would put him in the top like 400 of the world by just playing that one player. And that's how small the margins are in this game. And it's not a knock by any means on William Pepper, who's, just 1,900,000 places above me in the standings. It's just a kind of like a recognition of how fine the margins are for people between really good or great in this game. It's small decisions, like not worrying about playing Kepa against Liverpool because you want to root with your heart and they're going to score goals, even though I didn't own a single Liverpool asset in my side. So it made no sense not to start a keeper that might get a clean sheet and a 0-0 draw and bonus points. But, things like that don't really bother us. So things that do bother some people on this podcast are screenshots like this. It was a fun week. We didn't even do that much trash talking, I might say. I think I was pretty good
Yeah, no, I didn't hear a single thing. I was a little disappointed actually with how quiet it was. I have to say that respectfully. I mean, you are a gracious winner, because I might have had at least one comment had I won. I
It,
was very quiet because of the fact that I did not keep up with you.
it is fair. I think my bigger thing was I was mad at myself for the kind of poor Keppa move. I haven't liked where I've been in the overall standings in the league or even in the overall table. And for that long period, you had really ran up to me and surpassed me for a little bit. So I kind of felt like I had to be quiet there. Um, Plus, when a season goes awry like mine has, I kind of feel like the wheels are going to come off eventually. So I figure I'm just waiting for that period where I'm not only behind in this league, but also behind overall. I also was just spending the most amount of time just giving Kelly a lot of shit for just barely being able to squeak out a win against Kazi, who basically has about 6 players that aren't even in the Premier League anymore, let alone like starting each week for him. So it was a lot of fun in our household. And like usual, she had the last laugh when she won. We move on to our standings. You mentioned it. Kelly's still coming up behind 9 points back. You have Fishkin jumping up there. And of course, Jamie rolling in, myself, BJ right behind me. So the group is just, treading water, trying to hang along, and Matus will continue to probably get weak wins. But before we talk about players that are coming in, going out, I did want to talk a little bit about what your opinions are when it comes to planning around double and blank game weeks before we actually look at sides, transfers in, transfers out. And I do want to spend a little time talking about the new players that have come in.
Mhm.
But double game weeks versus blank game weeks. Do you feel like you have to attack these, or do you feel like you should just kind of work them into what your overall process is?
I think it depends on which of those clubs have the double game weeks and which do not. Like, let's say a team like Southampton has a double game week, but they're going up against City, and let's just throw in maybe like a mid-table team like Liverpool. Let's say they're going up against those teams, then it's not really something that you necessarily want to attack, because while they play 2 games, it's not really the best opportunity for the players to get points. On the flip side, too, for blank game weeks, it sometimes can be difficult if it's a good team with a blank game week, because like we can talk about Newcastle coming up with a blank game week in game week 25. I know that's still 3 game weeks away, but a lot of players have at least 2 or 3 Newcastle players now, and to have 3 of those guys miss out on that blank game week can be a big hurdle to overcome. So when it comes to attacking the double game weeks, I think it's always best to have as much in your team as possible that can, because any game, any match is a chance for extra points. So it's always good to have more available matches to get points from. But that doesn't mean that you should totally destroy your team to get to that point. Like, let's say you don't have any United players. You might have one United player and you want a couple more for the double game week. Don't go out of your way to drop someone who's been doing really well just for a chance to pick up someone who has 2 games, because who knows how it'll go. So I think when it comes down to it, you have to really, it's of course, anything that we ever say is always going to depend on your team, because every team out there is so different, that it's hard to always understand what you want to do unless you really look at your team and see where you want to get to. And I know, like, for me, I'm someone who, looking at it, like if we're talking about Arsenal has a double game week coming up, and then they have just fantastic fixtures over the next 6 weeks. Like, I don't think there's a world where you shouldn't be on 3 Arsenal players, whether it's 2 defenders and a mid, whether it's 2 mids and a defender, whatever the case might be, you should have 3 Arsenal players. I don't think there's any discussion, that we need past that. And so that's kind of how I'm looking at it, is that I want to make sure that I have the right guys there in the first place, and then be happy with them for potentially the next 2 or 3 weeks, because you don't want to get in a couple guys just for the double game week just to have to transfer them out a couple weeks later as well. You want those guys to be in there for the long haul.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think anytime you make a free transfer, it has to be centered around improving your team for the next match week with multiple weeks to go with it, unless you have a specific maneuver that you're, planning. I'm buying Saka this week, and I'm going to Kulusevski next week, and then the week after I'm going to Mount, because I just like these 3 fixtures, and I think those 3 players, like, that's worth the single transfer. And then the last transfer you make, to your bigger point, is someone that you would be willing to have for 2 or 3 more match weeks into your side, because that's how any, logical and smart-minded manager would go. I think when it comes to the double game weeks, players so often just want to take the -4s and the big hits, sometimes even -8s, because they think I can get 3 players in on a double game week, especially when we have the super game weeks where there's like 3-4 teams on double game weeks. So you can really you can almost mini wild card your team, but you're really sabotaging yourself because you're moving down a good couple 100,000 spots before you score a point. And when you end up looking at the players that you subbed out who play single match weeks, they oftentimes will score just as well. Or some starter that you start every single week that you stick to the bench because you brought in guys on double game weeks will outscore those players. Right. So the net gain always, to me, feels like it's more of a chase and a gamble than it is an actual strategic play. So let's take a look at the transfers leading in to match week 22. Jamie jumps in with all right, lads. Hi, Jamie, as always. Glad to have you here on the Fantasy Show this week. So, not a surprise to me, the top 3 players are Manchester United players who have maybe the best double game week in 3 or 4 seasons. 2 matches at home, one against a soft Palace side and the other against Leeds, who might score 4 and concede 5.
Right.
So it doesn't surprise me at all to see Fernandes, who has had basically like an absolute renaissance since Ronaldo left, like most United attacking players. Shaw is probably the most consistent defender in the game right now in the Premier League. And, of course, the hottest player in the Premier League, Rashford. So none of that really surprises me. Any of the top 3 surprise you?
No, like you mentioned before, it's United double game week with a chance for, honestly, 8 total goals. So potentially 16 returns across the front 3, across the front 5, essentially. And a good chance to clean against Palace. Leeds, I don't know if they'll necessarily hold on to a clean sheet. But I mean, we've seen United concede a free kick, right, to Crystal Palace, even it was a couple of weeks ago, the Elise free kick. So it's not necessarily a guarantee that it's going to be a clean sheet. But I think the chances of them being able to return 16 times, if you want to look at it that way, makes a whole ton of sense. And I appreciate it, Jamie. I feel like maybe I should try and do more of this every week since we're getting so many comments on it today.
Jamie comes in with, I need to full screen this for the lovely ensemble from the Polish Prince, classing up the joint. So, Jamie, I know you were a few minutes late as you had to wrap up after the podcast. I made a first comment about how he was in the witness protection program, or that he was just showing up in that jacket. So it was the only thing he was trying to get out of quicker than some of his transfers and moves. He came straight from work, so we all get the flack because he's just more dedicated than us on this fine Thursday evening. It's also freezing there, and
it is
it's probably a warm coat inside.
It does feel very nice on the inside.
So outside of the United assets, obviously, that we know are great, it does not surprise me to see arguably the hottest player in the Premier League or maybe one of the hottest players in the world, in Matoma, another Brighton gem just found out of nowhere. 500,000 people bringing him in this week. Does it scare you at all to either see this many people buying one player? Does it scare you at all to not own this player?
I definitely more so the latter than the former. I think at his price point, I'm not surprised that so many people are bringing him in because it makes so much sense. You know, he's not he's not a $9 million forward that went on a nice little hot streak after going cold for a long time. I mean, at his price point, you can essentially trade it out or transfer out any of your midfielders unless it's Pereira, and you'll hit Matoma for the amount of money. So I think, I almost have a sense of FOMO with not having Matoma in there. And I know we've talked about bringing Matoma. This was a few weeks ago, talked about bringing Matoma as well, like dropping Mo down to Matoma and then bumping, like a Darwin up to a Kane situation. So yeah, it's one of those where I feel like it just makes sense given the price point, given the fact that we know that he's going to be playing under De Zerbi. He's going to be playing this great in this role that is going to see him in front of the net pretty much the entire game. And like you said, I don't think there's anyone more exciting in the Premier League right now than just having this guy come out of absolutely nowhere and show the world what he's capable of doing.
Yeah, he plays like another electrical winger that I used to remember that scored lots of goals, dancing all around people and like flicks and kicks and scored on. He needed a few shots, but he scored a lot of goals. It'd be nice to see it come back, but that's what it reminds me of with the actual electricness of how he takes on defenders and plays off of people, can score in a variety of ways, different areas of the net, gets out wide, comes in inside. He's so talented. I mean, he's basically the new Trossard in their system, and I think he's actually more dynamic overall. And he's a little younger. He's a little quicker. I just think it's great. He's not in my side right now. I could move from Andreas to him, and I'm thinking about it, but it would be a -4, so it might be later on. The thing about all the Brighton players is that Brighton has a really good chance to have like 4 double match weeks between now and the end of the season, but also have like 2 or 3 blanks.
Sure.
So you have to be careful that you don't overload with any of their players. I'm a little surprised. I know you mentioned how great the Arsenal fixtures are. Nketiah hasn't actually scored enough or showed enough from a fantasy standpoint for me to warrant this type of, influx, because I think you can do so well with either Saliba, Zinchenko, or Gabriel at defense, Odegaard, Saka, or Martinelli in midfield. Yeah. And before we know it, Jesus will be back and this guy will be making 1-point appearances for 8 minutes a match. And you have to mix in now, they have false nines and Trossard. It just doesn't make sense to me why this many people are flocking in. I mean, almost 435,000 people have brought in this player this match week. And I know the double's coming, but can you make any heads or tails of this?
No, I think it's mainly like a huge reaction from the United game. And just kind of seeing what happened there and going off of that. Because like you said, if I want to bring in a third Arsenal asset, because this is all assuming that you already have 2, right? Because if you don't already have 2 Arsenal assets at this point, then you're not really paying attention to the game at all. So when I'm thinking about bringing a third, I'm not looking at Eddie Nketiah. I'm looking at someone like you said. There's Odegaard. There's even Xhaka. There's Gabriel, Saliba. Like it's just Ben White. I mean, you can even throw Tomiyasu in there just because, like, he's just a nice bench fodder in case you need to sub in the D. Like, if you want someone to be on your bench just in case. So I don't get the Nketiah thing. And maybe part of it too is like we talked about. He has a certain likability to him. The clip from the lunchroom from the All or Nothing series is going around a lot again when he's telling Lukanga like, hey man, just. You think we don't all want minutes? Just enjoy the time while you're here and make the best of it. And I think everyone's seeing that and like, oh, he's such a fun-loving guy, and he bagged in a couple goals against United. That's who I want in my team. But yeah, I don't think it makes sense as a third Arsenal asset.
So the ins make a lot of sense, especially Rashford and Fernandes. I think if you can get both of them in, if you can get one of them in, if you have one and you could get another, it makes total sense. And their fixtures after it are not bad. And of course they are both in-form players. So take a look at the outgoings. So obviously the first one does not surprise us at just over 11 million people. Or I'm sorry, 1.1 million people, because there aren't enough others that are smart enough to pay attention, because more people than that own him. Obviously, the big news on transfer deadline day was João Cancelo going on loan to Bayern Munich. Basically, you know, it's crazy to me. This guy was the best defensive fantasy asset in the game last year and the second best the year before to Trent. And that says a lot when you can outlast Robbo at a whole season's length. I thought going into this year, Cancelo would actually be better because of the kind of the shift that Pep was doing with the overall system and having Holland in there to cross to. Totally wrong. Fell out with another manager, just lost his mind. I don't know if it was the disappointment of not playing at the World Cup and falling out with that manager, and then he came back, and an 18-year-old like got some reps in the head of him, and then he just quit. But it'll be interesting to see how this guy's career pans out at Bayern. But he's out of our world. I think we understand why he's out. How about the next two? Because I'm pretty sure, if I'm not wrong, you have both of those guys in your side.
I do, which is a good sign if I hold on to them.
Or the next four, actually. I think you have the next four, actually.
I have all five of these guys.
So I guess I can ask you this question now before I hit the next slide. Have you hit the wild card button this week?
I've been toying around with it, and I know Jamie had a question earlier about United having a blank week coming up, and that is true. They do have a blank week coming up in 25, so that's in 3 game weeks. So if you are in a position, and this is just my opinion, if you're in a position where you're going to hit a wild card in this week, get your United players in this week, and then have a plan for their transfers out by game week 25. If you don't have the United assets you want now, don't break your team to try to get them in for the double game week to then have to work to get them back out in 25, because you're gonna hurt yourself way more than you should. So then looking at
we lost the Polish prince there for a moment. I don't know. Maybe his jacket.
I'm back.
There he is.
Nope, the jacket's staying.
I thought the jacket might have flown off. I thought Mary Poppins might have rolled in.
Sorry, I had to go back to the 70s really quick and then jump on back.
It was a fair time travel in the jacket. Well played.
So yes, I actually, the moment that the news came out that Cancelo was officially loaned out to Bayern, I transferred him out for Gabriel because I didn't want to miss more dollars, essentially, because the more people that are going to be transferring him out, the more money you're going to lose if you hold on to him. So I got him out the moment that news broke because I didn't even want to take the chance. And so I still have a transfer, and I was planning on taking a -4 this week to set myself up. But looking at it now, I might just have to scrap the whole thing and really just go for the wild card and kind of set myself up so that I can have a nice double game week with Arsenal and United. And then kind of slowly. Well, that's the problem, because Newcastle also has a blank game week, the same week that United does.
Correct.
So
we have lost the prince again. I'm sure he'll be back shortly. Here he comes.
I'm sorry. I don't know. The computer's bugging out here. Sorry. As I was saying, with Newcastle also having a double game or a blank game week, if you try and wildcard in 3 United players and 3 Newcastle players for the next 3 weeks, you're going to have a huge headache for 25, unless then you use another chip and you free hit then, which is something that I don't want to do because I want to hold on to the free hit. So we can talk about more in depth about which direction to go, but I might be wildcarding tonight.
Yeah, I could see it. I had it written down when I kind of looked at your team earlier. I thought to myself, basically, as we look at it here on the screen, Cancelo, Luka Dean, Darwin, Williams, Salah, Almiron. You're really looking at all those players with a question mark over them of whether or not they're players you should be considering. Obviously, Martinelli, I think, is that's splitting hairs, because again, it's what Arsenal assets you're going to have in. You're going to move out a guy and you're just going to lose money on him to move him out to bring in Odegaard. And then when you want to buy Martinelli back later, you pay $500,000 more than he was already on your team. So it just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So if you decide, have you thought about, I mean, obviously we know you just told us you've already moved out Cancelo and you brought in Gabriel, right?
Yep.
You have another free transfer?
Yep. Because I ended up not making any moves last week and just wrote it out. So have another free transfer.
I think if that's the case, honestly, you don't need to wild card this team. It's 1 week and you have Salah against Wolves. You have Martinelli against and White against Everton. You have Newcastle in a favorable matchup. City in a matchup that you don't have to worry about, and you have Haaland already. I mean, honestly, even putting Mitrovic and Pereira on the bench, you could still play Almiron. You have another transfer, so you can move out Dean or you can move out Almiron. I actually think you'd be wasting your wild card here. Looking at your side, actually, as much as it was fun to poke fun at you for owning the top 5 transferred out players in the game, which is I mean, it's not the type of feat that VJ has been handling all season long, but it is something in itself. I don't know that a wild card would make sense for you, and I don't know that you have to wild card with what you have. You just go pick up a United player.
I was gonna say with everyone transferring out players that I have, that just means I'll move up the standings a bit more because all those guys are gonna score and I'll be fine.
Right.
That's really how it works, right?
If they do well, you'll do great. And I think you could honestly move off of like Luka Dean and go to Luke Shaw, and you could honestly have like just as good of a chance to have a big week as anyone else with the side you have.
I think that's my only issue is debating between dropping down from Mo or moving off of Dean to a similar replacement, because I don't know. I've just been burned by Mo recently.
Yeah.
And it's tough to hold on to that kind of asset right now.
I think honestly the move for you, probably, I was going to say you couldn't do it, but then I remember you already moved Cancelo to Gabriel. You should probably go Mo to KDB. City has the double match week next week. So you get a double with City in 23. And I know he hasn't been the KDB of old from a fantasy standpoint, but there's still an opportunity for a 15-point week at any point.
Right.
And I don't know that you'll get a 15-point week out of Mo anytime soon. So if you were going to make another move, that might be your one if you wanted to get off of Mo. I know having extra money allows you to rebuild the side, but you're going to wild card soon, like within like 5 match weeks. So that's when you rebuild your side from a distribution standpoint. So maybe Mo to KDB, even Fernandez.
That's another one that I was toying with, is moving Mo to Fernandez, because like when Fernandez was in the league a couple of years ago without Ronaldo and he came on the scene, I mean, he was a special asset to have in fantasy. I think he's reaching those links.
He's getting back.
Again. Yep.
He's not on penalties, and he doesn't. Well, now that Eriksen is hurt, he will be taking more of the free kicks. There was a lot of things that knocked Fernandez's overall value down, and I would like to see what happens the next time United gets a penalty, because there's like rumblings that Rashford's on penalties. There's rumblings that it's Martial, and then some people believe that it's actually Casemiro. And if it's Casemiro, everyone in the game needs to own the guy, because all the guy does is pick up bonus points for basically just running around and kicking people in the middle of the ankle. It's amazing. If you're Brazilian and you kick people in the ankle, you are special. If you are freaking, any player that's ever played at Stoke, Sunderland, or Newcastle in the late 80s and you kick people in the ankles, you're just English and, everything bad about the game. Casemiro does it, and it's elegant because he was born in Brazil. Must be nice. So we'll move on to my side. Nothing to write home about. Decent week, 75 points. Angry about leaving those 8 points on the bench, obviously. Really excited and kind of laughing at myself that somehow, by being so afraid of taking a -4 and needing to make moves every single week to like field teams I wanted, I got through the entire 4.5 week injury of Reece James with him sitting on my bench.
Yeah.
Which is highly comical for the fact that I talk constantly about how Reece James just goes ahead and ruins my fantasy seasons. And yet I couldn't get rid of a guy who couldn't play for a month and a half. And now he's still in my side, and there's talk about him starting tomorrow at Fulham. And I'm like, shit, this might be good. I might roll him out there. We know he's a special talent. It's going to be funny when he shows up to training and he realizes that there's an entire new squad and he's never met any of them.
What past you now?
I'm kind of excited about it. I really do love the idea that I have a back four of Gabriel, Estupiñán, Trippier, and James, though. And with Bueno as my fifth. I guess my thing here is I have made the move. I moved Kulusevski to Rashford. There's not really... it was a free transfer. I don't think it was a question. At this point, I'm riding Kane and Haaland until I can't stomach having the two of them. De Bruyne, I think, will eventually become either Fernandes or Son. If Son's form keeps up, I think he'll be a big differential when he becomes like the second or third best player in the Premier League, like he's been for the last 2.5, 3 years. I think he'll get back to that level at some point in the second half. I think he'll be an asset that everyone wants, and there'll be a few others. So I'm looking still at how I wild card out of this team. Obviously, I'll start Kepa this week against Fulham. My real question here is what to do with the captain. It's on Rashford. There's not really a question about it. He has 2 matches, and he's probably the hottest form goal scorer in all the Premier League, which is insane to say when a guy has scored more than last year's Golden Boot winner at this point in Holland. But Rashford's that well. It's really the question of, can you not triple captain a guy who's playing 2 matches at home against teams who concede, like yesterday's news?
Yeah, the big thing is these are the moves, right, that we've talked about that will make or break your season. And, going for a triple captain this game week is obviously, it's a play that a lot of people are doing. Seeing stuff online, I see a lot of talk about triple captaining Rashford, triple captaining Bruno potentially too. But then you have the talks of waiting for City's double to triple captain Haaland. So it's like, it's tough because this is the one chance that you get to really make it right. And you don't want a Sadio Mane situation where you get a red card and the first half of the first game of the double game week, and then you're screwed the rest of the way. Not that I potentially see that happening with any of these players besides maybe Bruno. But it's this is the week that you could really cement yourself in where you're going to be for the end of the season, or this is the push that you make that lets you sit up higher where you want to be in the standings.
Yeah, as I look at my team here, I don't know that I'll triple captain Rashford, but I'm really tempted because I think it's a move. I think people are going to wait for the Haaland one. I think the Haaland one also is in between a Champions League match. So you never know if there'll be some level of rotation and I know that won't happen right now with how the form that United is in screams for Ten Hag to get 2 wins in a week. They're building something right now to go forward. I mean, as disgusting as it is to say this, they're still like up for a quadruple. Like they're in Europe, in the Europa League. They're probably favorites, even though they have to play Barcelona. They are favorites against Newcastle in the final, even though everyone except for Manchester United fan is rooting for Newcastle to win. And if you're not, and you aren't a United fan, then you don't love football or anything about the sport. And then you have them in the FA Cup still to go. And of course, like I said, they're, in the Premier League race, whether you like it or not. If City's in it, they're in it because they're a couple points behind. So it's just, It's crazy town that it's at this point. But they built something, and I think they're going to go for it. And I think for that, we know Rashford's going to play, and they're going to do everything they can to go all out. I do believe that Haaland is in the same bout. I don't think the double game week when you have to play Arsenal in one of those matches is as good of a fixture list, obviously, as Palace and Leeds. Now, Liverpool is going to have a double match week later on in the season. You hope that they might have responded by then. Brighton's going to have a ton of double match weeks. I know a few folks that are actually thinking that Brighton might get a triple in like 34 or 35, which could make a guy like Matoma just crazy off the charts if you could triple captain someone with 3 matches in 1 week. My biggest point score ever was I triple captained Alexis Sanchez, and he scored 7 goals and had 4 assists and had maximum bonus points in 2 matches. And I triple captained him. I was in like the top 50,000 of the world for that one match week, and it moved me up like 600 or 700,000 places. That was the first year I finished in the top 50,000, and I did that with like 2 weeks to go because it was after like Europa League when Arsenal inevitably would get knocked out, and they had to make up all their matches from their Thursday, Sundays. And Alexis Sanchez just went off. And I just remember being like, wow, this is really why you use the triple captain on a double match week. And then the next year I did it, and Sadio Mane got hurt against Watford with 6 minutes into the match, and I got 3 points on the triple captain. Painful. And I finished 10,000 in the world that year without a triple captain. And I thought to myself, if I got that one move right, I might have been in the top 1,000 of the overall game. And that's those small margins we talk about. So I think here, as much as I've thought about it, my other move here would be moving off of Andreas right now and going to Matoma because I have 0.8 in the bank. But I think a -4 to bring a guy off my bench that I'm comfortable sitting on my bench in Andreas just makes no sense. Like, yes, Matoma might go big this week, but then what? I sit Martinelli, I sit Bailly, who I think are both guys that have great matchups and I like. So it just doesn't make sense at this point to make that move. So I'm actually going to start Reece James, believe it or not, for the plain fact that if he comes in, he's just as good of a chance to score. He's also just as good of a chance, yes, Jay. Absolutely to Jamie's point. I have still not gotten over that. I was in Miami for the game, and it was irritating and frustrating, and I probably never get over it. It's sad to say. I love the player, though. And to be fair, he's hurt now at Bayern again, and doesn't seem like things are going so well for him there. So I hope things bounce around and turn back for him, though I do hope that Bayern struggles happen for the rest of the second half, because I like the fact that there's actually a race in that league for once after New Year's Day. Now, don't get me wrong. There won't be a race probably by March 1st, but it's February 2nd, so I'm going to take advantage of it now. But like I was saying, I just don't think it's worth making moves. But I think I'm going to sit Mitrovic, and my reasoning is that if Reece James plays, I think there's a good chance he returns. And even if they bring him in as a substitute, there's still an opportunity for an attacking return from him at any point when he comes on the pitch. And for whatever reason, all the buys and the excitement, I feel like Chelsea might have a little bit of a bounce in the next few matches where they score some goals. I think the Mudryk kid is really, really good. And I think that there's just a chance, and I'm not saying they're going to catch fire and storm up to the Champions League places or anything like that, because I think they're still going to have struggle betting in all these different high-level talents.
Yeah.
But I could see them putting in a performance against Fulham. And if healthy, I could see Graham Potter going to what he believes is his absolute best 11 tomorrow of all days against a London rival. And I think anyone in the world that doesn't think that Reece James is in the best 11 of the Chelsea side is crazy, which you could argue seeing that they have 155 registered senior players. So before we start to wrap up here, I thought it would be fun to look a little bit at some of the high players and the new transfers that came into the game over the last week and a half. We could have also named this segment Name the New Chelsea Signee.
Yeah.
But if I asked you to tell me from a fantasy standpoint during the January transfer who the best signing was for the Premier League, who do you think it was?
From a purely fantasy standpoint, I think it'll end up being Mudryk. I think it might take a couple weeks. I don't think we're going to see the returns right away. I think it'll take a couple weeks, but I think by the end of the season, when you count up the points from players from today to match week 38, I think Mudryk will have the most points, and he's not crazy expensive either. It's not like, so when you're looking at it, you have to also take into account how expensive are these players that are being transferred into the game. And Mudryk, I think, did we double check where?
7 million.
7 million. So less than the crazy 8 million mid saga that everyone's going through. And I think he'll end up performing like an $8 to $9 million midfielder. So I think Mudryk will probably be the best from a fantasy standpoint. I don't know if you think someone else.
No, that was one of them. So I thought that when Arnaut Danjuma was going to go to Everton on loan, I actually thought it was just going to be from a fantasy standpoint an absolute steal, because I just thought he was going to score whatever goals they could, because he was going to be the most talented player in a bad team.
Yeah.
Similar to what he was when he played for Bournemouth, and just how his game has overall been, even at Villarreal. When he ended up at Spurs, I thought to myself, oh man, now he's like Richarlison. He's a guy who can't get into the side, and if he does, it'll be for short bits and, bots, and it really won't be worth it. So I took him off the list. I think there's a couple interesting ones that I think will get overlooked. Like, I think that Weston McKennie at Leeds actually is going to be an interesting player. He's only 5 million. He's going to play, and he is an absolute force at set pieces.
Yeah.
And, Leeds have shown that they can score some goals, and he will mix himself in with a goal or two on open play as well, especially if you play with an attacking mindset that allows midfielders to drift forward. And I think Jesse Marsch will give him carte blanche to kind of be Weston McKennie, which will help Leeds, like usual, score goals, and will also help Leeds concede goals.
I just don't think, looking at the team, when you see a guy like Aronson at 5'4" or Nonto at 5, up top, I'm not going to have two Leeds players in my side. So we're just picking one Leeds player here. I think most fantasy managers would either have one or none. And I think when you compare the prices of Aronson, even Harrison, and Nonto, they're all in that 5 to 5'4" range. I don't know if McKennie necessarily cracks that list. I think McKennie is a solid player. He's a solid box-to-box midfielder who loves getting up and down. But I think from a fantasy standpoint, I don't know if I would pick him over the likes of Aronson or Harrison or Nonto.
Yeah, I was just looking at the list in general. The other one that I think is actually really intriguing is one that probably fell under the radar, which is Alex Moreno at Villa. He's a $4.5 million defender, came from Spain. You his former Barcelona player. That Unai Emery didn't go out and buy this player because he wanted him to sit on the bench.
Right.
He bought this player to be part of the revolution. There was some funny meme the other day. It was like Unai Emery is going to take over England by convincing the king he is the king. And, and they were showing the prince up in the king up in the box, just so excited about it because he's the biggest Villa fan, one of the biggest Villa fans, like a real supporter that loves the club and understands it. But this kid is really good. He is a young defender, but he plays well. And he's attack-minded, goes forward. And that only 4.5, and Villa's shown already a propensity for a clean sheet since Emery got there. And we all know he's a tactical genius. So when it comes to actually setting teams up in a way to win, he's up there with Klopp and Guardiola and the best managers in the world, let alone the Premier League. So I think he's interesting. And I think the two Forest players, that pop up are, Danilo at 4.5 million as a midfielder. And I think you'd be sleeping on the idea that signing a Champions League winner in Keylor Navas at 4.5 million as a keeper isn't an absolute steal. And we all joked about Dean Henderson and all the points he got earlier with the saves and the clean sheets. If Keylor Navas were there, they'd have more points right now.
Yeah.
Like he is a class above many of the keepers. And I know he's getting up there in age, and he started to lose it a little bit at PSG, which made them go out and sign Donnarumma. But for me, he's still a top level keeper. He should be starting at a big club. And I guess Forest is a big club, but he's got a big job. And I think if they stay up, he'll play a big, big role in it.
Yeah, I like that shout. I think, especially for a keeper at 4-5, that you don't necessarily need to start. A lot of players still on the 2-4-5s. If you want two playable keepers and you don't want Ward, then having a 4-5 plus another 4-5 or a 4-5 and a 4-8, Keylor Navas is definitely going to be one to take a look into, because he has the quality. And I think, we can joke around about how many signings these teams are making, but they're making the signings to try and keep themselves up. And I think Forest have done exactly that. They've gotten who they thought would be best to keep them up, and I think they will accomplish just that.
Well, speaking of teams who do nothing but make big signings, moves they need to make at times when they need to be made. What are your thoughts about Cody Gakpo and the fact that he's already lost 0.2 in his price tag in just under a month?
Yeah, I don't blame anyone for dropping him. I feel like he's been thrown into a really poor situation where he's being forced to play a role that he's not used to playing, along with a bunch of guys who are not playing up to the standards that they have been playing, around a coach who is not coaching at the level that he's used to coaching. And I feel like all of these things rolled into one is just a big headache. And I know that the price can be attractive, but if there's nothing clicking up front, then why are you going to have someone like that sit on your team?
Yeah, I'm with you there. I feel like there's a player there. You can kind of see it. I think the last couple outings have been his best, which is great. It seems like every time he plays, he gets a little more comfortable with the runs, with the players, and he still makes runs that people are missing. And when they start to find him, I'm hoping he'll start to finish. At the same time, he's had opportunities and hasn't scored, and that will make a fantasy manager crazy.
Yeah.
Why anyone bought him in the first place is kind of crazy. That was the crazy part to me. Like the idea there were enough owners to sell him to actually create a price drop is kind of what ultimately frustrated me. It would almost be like if I look now and Mudrik's price was 7-1. I'd be like, how did enough people buy him?
Yeah.
That anyone thought he should have a price increase. My thing with Cody is that I think he just needs his first. I really do believe one goal will set him off and help him start to get going. But I also think playing out on the left would be really, really helpful. Like I just don't believe
it would make sense.
I don't believe he belongs in the center, but it's clear that the manager believes he should be playing through the center and sees him as a long-term solution through the center, whether that's with Darwin or that's with Bobby or that's, with one of the kids behind him eventually. We're going to have to wait and see. I just feel like it also has to be something of a test to Darwin to almost push him to be like, do you want to be the guy who starts on the left? Do you want to be the guy that starts in the middle?
Sure.
But like, you can't be the guy who sits on the bench and then gets subbed in and we question which one of those spots you're going into.
Yeah.
Like you got to pick one of these and make it yours.
Right.
I do expect him to play against Wolves from the beginning. If he doesn't, I'll really then start to question like whether this is about player, manager, or situation, because it's now not about injury. He's fully fit.
Right.
He's got to play. It should be Mo Gakpo and Nunez from the rip, however you want to line them up. And, probably Keita behind them. And then whatever else you want to do with the midfield, I understand with rotation. So we'll get out of here on this. One parting thought for this week from a fantasy standpoint, whether it's double game weeks, triple captains, -4s for hits on defenders you don't want.
Don't do that. One parting thought. Trust your judgment. And by that, I mean, don't listen to anything that I've said all night and do something else, and you will be just fine.
Well said, my friend. There's always a way to sign off by passing the buck. You just basically told people, don't listen to me because I'll be wrong. Trust what you do. And then when you're wrong, you can only blame yourself.
And you knew that I was right all along.
Exactly. Well played. So, from the man only slightly frigid in Springfield, Massachusetts in the regular old hoodie, and the Polish Prince absolutely frigid in Chicago in a dapper jacket, as Jamie would say, ready for a wedding. We wish you adieu. We wish you well. Have a great week, and I hope all your transfers turn great. All your players haul, and if they don't blame us. Have a good night, everyone, and we'll see you next Thursday night for another edition of the Fantasy Premier.